a lot has happened in the last, 18 months, 17 months. Where are we now?
Well, now we know we won the war. I mean, I knew that we will win the war, but I didn't know how decisively. And I'm delighted to say that we have practically won the war. There is a lot to come, and there will be pain involved, and Israel will be hurt again. But if you look at the overall picture, it's even more positive than I expected.
Can you describe, because a lot of people think, looking at how much devastation there was in Gaza and how not all of the hostages are back and Hamas is still not out of power, how is it that you have decided that Israel has won?
Because I agree with my grandmother, who used to say that it's better to be rich, healthy, and young than old, sick, and poor. Of course, things could be perfect, but they're not. The question is, overall, if you understand what this war is about, are we winning in a very major way, or are we stuck? And I think we're winning in a very major way. Let me first start and explain what this war is about. This war is about the question, can civilized people defend themselves from barbarians, even if the barbarians embed themselves in their own civilian population? And dumb people on the liberal side basically say, once we will have to hit people who are not personally guilty, then we can't defend ourselves, which is basically what the barbarians count on. The major weapon of the barbarians is using against us our own values. And if we can't find a way of being Sparta vis-a-vis our enemies, even when we are essence vis-a-vis ourselves and people who want to have a dispute with us but are civilized people where you can reach compromises and it's not about your existence, we needed to demonstrate, and we have demonstrated, that we can find a way of breaking the barbarians without losing what we are, without undermining what we are. And let me explain why this problem is dramatically more difficult in the last 40, 50 years than it was before, particularly since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because people in the West assumed after the collapse of the Soviet Union that now we liberals have won, and therefore we can afford not only to have one hand tied behind our backs, as we should when we fight the barbarians, because we don't want to be like the barbarians, okay? So a liberal should fight his enemy with one hand tied behind his back, but the progressives decided we should tie both our hands behind our back, and we shouldn't be able to defend ourselves, particularly if our enemy has a lot of pigments, because if he has a lot of pigments, he must be right and we must be wrong, because there is nothing as wrong as being white or pink or whatever you want to call it. This is one of the most racist approaches that I can possibly think about. Once you're white, you must be guilty. Once you have pigments, you must be right. And of course, it's okay if you behave like a barbarian, because after all, you suffered from slavery or you suffered from colonialism. And we white people are responsible for slavery and colonialism, forgetting that it's the white people who stopped slavery that was the standard behavior before. And forgetting that colonialism, namely the big power always wanting to dominate other powers, is the way to describe human history right from the very beginning. We were the ones who didn't want to do it anymore after we realized we don't have to do it. So this attitude, this distorted, sick, progressive attitude strengthened the barbarians and weakened us. And also technology strengthened the barbarians, because the kind of technology that was only available for superpowers, you can now buy in the supermarket. A bunch of barbaric, uncivilized, primitive tribes in Yemen can shoot ballistic missiles. Think about it in terms of 30, 40 years ago, only superpowers had ballistic missiles. anything concerning accuracy that was very sophisticated. You can take a toy, you can buy a toy, dismantle parts of it, put it in a missile, and it becomes a precision-guided munition. So they can undermine us by denying the strong power the two instruments of fighting against radicals. The ability to disregard it and to say, yes, it's painful, it's a nuisance, but it doesn't threaten our existence, because they can hit with these weapons the centers of population. And second, because even if you destroy them, the residual capability that they will have can hit your centers of population. And by the way, it's getting worse, because now, since the most advanced technology in recent decades is in biology, they can produce pathogens in their kitchens so that they can use against us biological warfare. And imagine the residual capability. So you can't destroy them, you can't ignore them. And the question is, can you fight them, and can you successfully fight them? And what Hamas was essentially saying is, we can fight Israel and win, not because we are stronger, but because the Gaza Strip is the most fortified place ever in human history, because it is fortified not only by missiles and by tunnels, it is also fortified by the New York Times and the BBC and CNN and the courts in The Hague and Amnesty International and practically every international organization, prostituted by the fact that it is dominated by a majority of countries, and the majority of countries in the world are either autocratic or dictatorial or barbarian. So basically they undermine democracy, and you sit in the UN and you define what democracy is and human rights are, and it's the Libyans and the Syrians and the North Koreans and the Venezuelans and the what have you, the Cubans, okay? So they became much stronger because technology made it possible for them. And we became much weaker because the progressives prostituted liberalism. Let me say something now in a broader sense. The worst enemy of something good is something perfect in the same direction. For instance, you can't have any kind of democracy or human rights without nationalism, because you need a system of solidarity where you're willing to say, I'm willing to give up things for somebody else because in the long run it helps me. You need solidarity, and the broadest solidarity beyond kinship is the national solidarity. So nationalism is a good thing. Who's the enemy of the person who is a patriot, who is nationally inclined? Somebody who's a super duper patriot, namely a fascist, okay? This is too much nationalism is the enemy of nationalism. Too much liberalism is the enemy of liberalism. If you say, let me try to see to it that in war, where people are killed, that is what war is about. When I defend myself, and I will defend myself, let me reduce the number of casualties also on the other side. Yes, let me see to it that as few civilians are hurt during a war. Yes. But if you say, once you hurt civilians and I can bring the pictures, then the barbarians can win because the good guys have hurt civilians by mistake. If that is the case, then Western civilization is over. And Israel was put in a position in the Gaza Strip where it knew that if we don't respond very harshly to what Hamas did to us, we will have a regional war at our hand, because all the Arabs who are no longer radicals and all the Arabs who are willing to acquiesce at the existence of the State of Israel will now be pressured by their own public opinion and say, you see, you can kill the Jews, you can rape their women, you can decapitate them, you can burn their babies, and you can get away with it. The only defense the Egyptians have against radical Egyptian public opinion, the Jordanians have against their even more radical public opinion, is to say we can't afford it. Look what happened to Gaza. Do you want Gaza in Cairo? Do you want Gaza in Amman? Okay? So the only way you can maintain in the Middle East some kind of relative stability, okay? A stable Middle East is an oxymoron, but almost like a democratic Middle East. But at least we have, in the last 50 years, no all-out regional war because Egypt is out of war. Who's threatening the Egyptian regime? The Muslim Brothers. When they had elections in Egypt, the Muslim Brothers won. What would have happened if we didn't have a military coup in Egypt? The Muslim Brothers would have come back to the point where Egypt wanted to be and was, namely the leader of the Arab world against Israel. So we have a regional war at our hand. We had to make sure that in Gaza, Hamas is defeated. We are not done yet. We are waiting for more hostages to come in and then to completely destroy Hamas's ability to restore its military capability before the 7th of October. But this was the essence of the war. And we won the war because we won it on three different levels. We won it not only in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Iran, we won it in the regional sense, we won it in the international sense, and I hope, here I'm not sure, I hope we're also winning it in the domestic sense. Let me perhaps describe these three levels because it's extremely important. In the Middle East, our situation is dramatically better than it ever was, because for the first time, most Arab countries realize that not only do they have to acquiesce with the existence of the State of Israel, also they can't do without Israel. They need us today because when it comes to fighting their three enemies, Iran, the Muslim Brothers, and the stupidity of the United States, Israel is the most important ally they have. The United States is immeasurably stronger, but Israel is immeasurably more dependable, because in the United States you may get an Obama that basically works for his enemies against his allies, and with the Israelis you know that the Israelis don't have a choice. They have to fight against the same enemies because they don't have a choice. And we have demonstrated that we can destroy Hamas. We're still working at it, but I don't have a doubt that we will succeed. More importantly, that Hezbollah, instead of being a major threat, strategic threat to Israel that Israel had no good response for, is now a major nuisance. It's a major nuisance, not a minor nuisance, but when Israel determined, against the American advice, to throw in a few seconds 84 tons of bombs in the middle of Beirut, this is the way you deal with barbarians. You go to Beirut, you don't go to the border, you go to where it hurts them the most. They go to where it hurts us the most, namely killing individual Israelis, raping them and decapitating them. We go to where it hurts them the most, where they think they have a sanctuary. They must be demonstrated, they must be shown that they can run but they cannot hide. Not even behind CNN and the BBC and the UN and what have you, okay? So when we decimated Hezbollah in Lebanon, it is still a problem. But before the war, we thought we don't have an answer to it. And we were deterred by Hezbollah. And we were deterred by the Iranians through Hezbollah. And by doing the exact opposite of what the Americans wanted, and invading Lebanon, and bombarding Beirut, and killing Nasrallah, and his replacement, and his replacement. And later, when the Iranians attacked us, we demonstrated two very important things. A, how vulnerable the Iranians are, because we destroyed the most important part of their air defense systems. And also, when they do against us everything they can do, or almost everything they can do, it's unpleasant, but it is not even marginal. It is on the verge of being inconsequential. When they shoot hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones and what have you, and cruise missiles and so on. So Iran is dramatically weaker, first of all, because the vulnerability of Iran was exposed. Iran is dramatically weaker because the proxies of Iran were hit very hard. The Arab world saw that Israel can do it without losing its support in the United States. Actually, what the Saudis and others want more than anything else is a situation where, on the one hand, you improve your relations with the United States, and on the other hand, you don't listen to the dumb advice you get from Washington, because it will always be counterproductive. I mean, when Biden came to power, the first thing he did, or one of the first things he did, he took the Houthis off the terrorist list and gave them humanitarian support. He took the Saudis and the Emiratis, and both of them were prevented by the Americans from effectively fighting the Houthis, because the Americans believe that if an alligator attacks you, give him a banana, and then he will be persuaded. I mean, they come from a parallel universe when it comes to radicals. And what have the Houthis done? Because the Americans were so dumb, they attack American ships and Israeli ships and British ships, and they basically starve Egypt, because by destroying the commercial lane in the Red Sea, they affect 15% of the world trade. And Egypt doesn't have any income. The Egyptians only have tourism that is low, and the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal is not operating because of the Houthis. So what the Saudis and the Emiratis and others want is a way of finding a way of working with the Americans, improving the relations with the Americans, and completely disregarding their strategic advice because they don't know what they're doing.
So
okay?
What is it about the advice from Washington that it so completely misses the mark?